Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost, your weekly look at the world of business and finance right here on Al Jazeera. This week, the economic outlook for the Middle East. The IMF's forecast is out. It's not good. We break it down and see what the economic future looks like in times of uncertainty. Also, rationing in Nepal. Kathmandu can't pay for the oil. Banks are running out of cash. Just what is going on? And hacked. Millions of PlayStation users have their credit card details stolen. What damage has it done to them and Sony's reputation? If you watch the news, and I'm sure you do, you will know the Middle East and North Africa are going through unprecedented political and social change. You can also now add to that list economic change, because until late 2010, the region was actually on track for a recovery from this global crisis. Now the outlook is, like everything else, full of uncertainty. So this week we're looking in depth at a major regional report from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and just as some background, it does break the region into two distinct groups, the oil exporters and the oil importers. Overall, the whole region's expected to grow 3.9% this year, unchanged actually from 2010. But the oil exporters are going to expand almost 5% in 2011 compared to 3.5% this year. The fastest growing economy is where we are, Qatar, 20%, up from 16.3%. And the worst performing, Iran, growth there expected to be nothing, down from 1% in 2010. On the other hand, those countries going without oil, well, they're going to see a decline in growth, 2.3%. It was down from 4.7%. And let's take two countries from the revolution. Egypt, devastated by a collapse in tourism. It's forecast to grow 1%, down from 5%. And Tunisia, also 1%, compared with 3.7% back over the course of this year. And then there is somewhere like Libya, an oil exporter, which has seen more unrest and destruction than other countries, and it's done terrible things to the industry there. Not only is oil money being lost to attacks, it's being lost when oil installations aren't attacked. That's because Gaddafi's forces occupy them in the knowledge that NATO can't hit them. Have a quick look at this from Sue Turton, who's in Libya, before we drill down further into the IMF's report.
Crippling oil exports in eastern Libya. There were 30 million litres of oil in this storage tank until a Gaddafi shell set it alight. The fire raged for 6 days and created a diversion that allowed Gaddafi's men to escape opposition soldiers who had had them surrounded in this small town of Zuetina, northwest of Ajdabiya. Even with them gone, production here has stopped completely. It's the same picture across the country, exports dropping from 1.3 million barrels a day to a trickle. Just one shipment left Tobruk earlier this month, earning the opposition $129 million. The infrastructure in the east is mostly still in place, but the new oil chief said working on facilities was very dangerous.
Those who were protecting the booster station, there were 9 people, young people, and 8 of them got slaughtered, literally, by the attackers.
Those working here at the Zuetina oil facility are too scared to talk about what it was like when Gaddafi troops occupied their town, because they were here 3 times as they were occupying oil facilities all the way along this coast down to Brega Newtown. They stayed here safe in the knowledge that NATO wouldn't drop airstrikes on huge oil tanks right next to civilian populations.
Right, then let's get into the detail of the IMF's regional economic outlook for the Middle East, North Africa, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Joining us from Dubai is Masood Ahmed. He is the regional director with the International Monetary Fund. Masood, I've been reading some reports here which were talking about a lot of the policies that places like Egypt and Tunisia actually had in place prior to the uprisings. And they were actually praised by you, by the IMF. They were selling public companies, they were reducing subsidies, they were apparently going down the right path. Are you then confident that they can do it again, that they could move past all this upheaval that they've seen and make some real changes, positive changes again?
I think what Egypt, what Tunisia were doing contributed to improving their rates of growth on average. And indeed, Tunisia had the highest growth rate per capita in the region for many years. But what I think we've all learned from these events is that macro numbers, simply the rates of growth, aren't enough. You need to get behind them to start looking at how the benefits of that growth being distributed. Is everybody getting a share of those benefits? Do people feel that they have to be connected or privilege to be able to get a business started? Is corruption something that's not just an affront to dignity, but also in some ways an impediment to economic activity? And I think for us in the IMF, for others now, the issue is going to be how far can one get behind the macro numbers to try and look at the things that would make the growth sustainable. And that's where I guess the authorities in both Tunisia and in Egypt are very much focused. And I see that that kind of imperative in many other finance ministers, governors across the region, all looking at ways to make growth and jobs more sustainable.
But you know, before we think too much about the long-term growth, I'm wondering about what's happening in the short term. You've got Egypt coming in asking for about $4 billion worth of loans from you. Are there other countries as well looking for short-term loans?
Well, in the case of Egypt, what we know is that they have a financing need this year of about $10 to $12 billion. They've said that they are talking to a number of neighboring countries, GCC, others, to other institutions to see how much financing they can mobilize. And then based on that, they may come to us for a contribution that the IMF could make. What the IMF has said is that we are ready to consider that request when it comes to us. And also, we've made a statement that we could provide about $35 billion in aggregate for all the oil importing countries in the region if they were to request it. So far, that's the current state of play.
Just before we move on to some other countries, Masood, I want to ask you about the issue of employment, or indeed unemployment, because in many ways that was at the heart of all this. The protesters, they were people who didn't have work, particularly young people who didn't have a job. What have these countries got to do to stimulate a bit of employment?
This region has the highest rate of youth unemployment. In many countries in the region, a fifth or a third of all young people are without jobs. And you can see why not having a job, not having the prospect of a job can foster this sense of despair and hopelessness, which has been one important driver of the unrest that we've seen. What can countries do to deal with it? A lot of it is going to be actions that will pay off only in the medium term, because to create jobs you've got to look at the business environment so that small businesses can set themselves up more easily. You've got to look at the skill set that young people have when they come out of schools and colleges. Many of them have diplomas today, but they don't really have the skills for the private sector jobs that they need to get into. And you've also got to look at the way in which the labor market functions so that you're protecting workers, not protecting jobs. But in the short run also, there are some things that could be done. Governments are now thinking about embarking on labor-intensive infrastructure schemes that could create public works in the short term, or providing subsidies to small and medium enterprises to increase their ability to hire in the short term. These short-term things are important to give a sort of immediate dividend to young people who are looking for results today, but they're not a substitute for the kind of comprehensive growth and job strategy that is needed in many, many countries in the region for the medium term.
All right, Masood, stay with me because I want to keep introducing some new elements throughout this interview so we cover all the bases. Something that has interested us for some time is remittances from the Middle East and the idea that they could almost balance the economic gains made in the region with contributions to other parts of the world. I'm going to show some numbers first from the GCC, which does account for 41% of the world's proven oil reserves. So obviously a lot of oil money is made here, but as a result there is a large expat community which will remit $75 billion this year. On top of that, sovereign wealth funds are expected to invest $43 billion overseas, and almost $600 billion will be spent on imports. So, Masood, it's an overlooked part perhaps of Middle East economies, I think, and we shouldn't really underestimate the importance of remittances which come from the Gulf and in a way end up feeding into other global economies.
I think remittances from the Gulf countries, both to neighboring countries and to countries further afield in Asia or in Europe, have been a big part of the success story that has driven growth and integration in this region. And we've been doing some recent work that shows that although the oil importing countries in the region clearly get hurt when oil prices go up because they have to pay more for their oil imports, they also have some benefit because when oil prices go up, And when economic activity and incomes go up in the oil exporters, some of that is transferred back. So in fact, for the kinds of results we've been seeing over the past decade suggests that remittances are going to continue to be a big part of those interdependencies. But remittances are one dimension of this. You also see increasingly investment from oil exporters, the GCC countries, others in the region to their neighbors. You see tourism as a growing part of those links. And I think that what you find is that amongst the oil importing countries, those who trade more with the GCC, for example, Jordan or Lebanon, actually get hurt less during a global downturn than those who trade primarily with, say, Europe. So Tunisia and Morocco have seen their trade and tourism affected more because Europe has been growing so slowly. On the other hand, Jordan and Lebanon have not had quite the same effect because the GCC countries have been doing well.
OK, then let's turn our attention to Pakistan now, of course, devastated by last year's floods, and that's continuing to have an impact on the economy there. Pakistan had to turn to the International Monetary Fund for $11.3 billion in emergency aid. The economy actually had been growing at an average of 5%, but this year, after the floods, it's expected to expand only at almost 3%. The IMF's program definitely helped stabilise the economy, but the budget deficit is back on the rise, could hit 6.3% in the 09-10 financial year, and you've got inflation rising too. So, Masood, what is the situation right now? What is the IMF's attitude, if I can say that, towards Pakistan ongoing? Because obviously you're not just going to keep simply throwing money at the country, even though they had a very situation and may still have more acute situations on the way.
We've been supporting Pakistan since it had an initial financial difficulty starting actually in 2008. Since then, we've kind of been working with Pakistan. But now the situation is that Pakistan economy has been affected badly by the floods. It's coming out of that process. Remittances are doing relatively well, as we were discussing, for the region more broadly. You also see the current account doing relatively well. On the other hand, public finances in Pakistan and the fact that taxes are such a low part of GDP has been a continuing source of concern to both the government of Pakistan, but also to its international partners. And we, as part of our program that we are supporting in Pakistan, a key element is to make public finances in Pakistan more robust, because what this would do is then provide the basis for moving Pakistan from the kind of 3-4% growth rate we're likely to see this year to something closer to 6 and 7, which is what they need to generate the jobs again for a young and growing labor force.
But again, short term, the more immediate term, what will be the next tranche of IMF money given to Pakistan, and when might we see that?
We have had, in the current program, which expires at the end of September, there are still 2 potential tranches of financing that are still left. We've been talking to the Pakistani authorities when they were in Washington about 10 days ago about the kinds of actions that need to be taken, both in terms of the public finances coming out in a good place for this fiscal year, which ends in June, as well as the budget for next year, which of course, as you can imagine, is a key plank of the economic outlook going forward, and some measures on tax policy and on subsidies. And as soon as action can be taken on these, that would then both put Pakistan's own economy on a better track and enable us to bring that next tranche to our board. As to the timing of it, I think it very much depends on when the Pakistani authorities feel that they're able to bring these issues to a satisfactory conclusion.
All right, we've got one more to do, Masood, and there's Afghanistan, where the IMF and the Afghan government have been at loggerheads really over the fate of Kabul Bank. Afghanistan's largest bank nearly collapsed last year from mismanagement. It's got loans worth $990 million outstanding. The central bank actually says those loans were made fraudulently, and it's trying to get the money back too. So far, $47 million has been repaid, with plans to pursue other borrowers. But here's a surprising statistic about Afghanistan. The Afghan economy as a whole is predicted to grow at 8% this year, only slightly lower than last year. The IMF's attitude was basically liquidate. What is the thinking behind that, given the importance, we must remember, of Kabul Bank to Afghanistan and Afghan life?
We and others have been discussing with them what kinds of measures need to be taken to deal with the problems in Kabul Bank, and they've now announced that they are going to move towards liquidating Kabul Bank. We think that's a good decision. Equally important in our view is to take action which they've announced that they intend to do, to pursue those people who took some of the fraudulent loans and to try and recover those. And also important will be to put in place mechanisms that reduce the likelihood of this kind of problem occurring in the financial sector going forward.
Masood Ahmed from the IMF, thank you so much for joining us on Counting the Cost. Now, on a completely different note, electronics giant Sony's had a bad week. The online component of its flagship PlayStation console was hacked, putting at risk tens of millions of people's personal details. Just how did it happen and what effect will it have? We will look at that a little later on. Right now, though, we look at Nepal, already South Asia's poorest economy and now witnessing a financial crisis in the making. The government's fast running out of money to pay its bills. The wealthy are withdrawing money at a rapid rate, and it's forcing Kathmandu to limit withdrawals. Sabina Shrestha takes up the story for us.
These people have been queuing for hours to get a ration of 5 or 10 litres of fuel.
I can't go to clients, and our work has been shut down.
Nepal Oil Corporation has to pay the Indian Oil Corporation, its sole supplier of fuel, the international rate of oil prices. But back at home, it's hard for them to raise the price of oil because of political pressure. The government has to subsidize it at a huge loss to themselves. But as global price of oil increases, the government is hard-pressed to pay the Indian counterpart for enough supply of fuel.
Total export of Nepal is hardly 60 billion. And we are importing 100 billion of only oil. So there is a great trade imbalance.
The government sold some of its reserve US dollars to pay the amount owed, but the corporation still doesn't have enough to buy new stock. The country's economy has already been severely affected by 14 hours of daily power cuts. Of the total import of diesel, 60% is used in private electricity generators because generating capacity does not meet demand. And the problems with fuel reflect wider financial difficulties. Just this current fiscal year, Nepalis have withdrawn $270 million worth of their money from banks as Indian currency, more than 4 times the amount they withdrew the year before. The central bank has tried to put a cap on this capital flight, which has hit traders. Narotham Shrestha imports fabric from India.
The maximum currency we can withdraw is 10 to 20,000. We can hardly buy anything with it, so people have to organise money through informal channels.
As money is fleeing the country, banks are trying to attract deposits by promises of high interest rates. But the business community can no longer afford to get loans because of the high rates, dealing a further blow to the already poor investment climate. There are fears of a banking crisis. But former Finance Secretary Rameshwar Khanal, who recently resigned after disagreements with the Finance Minister, insists that the difficulties are temporary.
The situation that we are facing now in the banking sector about the liquidity problems is not going to last long. It happened because of the real estate boom last year, and also people's preference for gold and that sort of assets.
The fear of banks going under has also made people invest in unregulated financial systems like cooperatives. But according to Khanal, the market would correct itself if the government places a high priority to the economy.
This might be a sign of worry if the policymakers and regulatory institutions do not pay attention to these issues.
But far from concentrating on the economy, the government hasn't even managed to spend the development budget, leaving almost $200 million unspent in the government treasury. With weak institutions, short of money, short of fuel and electricity, and short of political leadership, Nepal's economy could be headed for more dark days ahead. Sabina Shrestha for Counting the Cost, Al Jazeera, Kathmandu.
Finally this week, one of the biggest internet security break-ins ever, a cyber attack on Sony's PlayStation network. The names, the addresses, possibly the credit card data belonging to 77 million user accounts was stolen. The network was shut down on April 19, all very embarrassing and worrying for one of the giants of the electronics world. More from Rob Reynolds in San Diego, California.
At the Games On video game shop in San Diego, players paused from blasting and thwacking their virtual opponents to sound off about the epic security breach in Sony's PlayStation network.
As a gamer, I kind of assume that when I confide in a game system, in a network, I kind of trust that, yeah, everything's going to be taken care of. I'm going to be secure. I'm going to be safe. But now I'm starting to second guess that.
Computer security experts say there is a thriving online marketplace for stolen personal data. The information can be used to purchase items with stolen credit cards, set up false identities, set up bank accounts, receive loans, public assistance, and can even provide cover for terrorists. The company waited for more than a week after hackers broke in on April 16th to warn its customers. Sony urged them to check bank accounts and credit records carefully and to beware of online scams that could take advantage of their stolen information. Customers are furious.
Sony could have and should have done a much better job in securing their customers' information.
Sony says it has alerted the FBI's cyber crime unit here in San Diego, but so far the agency has not had any comment. And already the first lawsuits are being filed against Sony by attorneys on behalf of their hacked clients.
All right, let's discuss this further, shall we? Sitting in front of her computer web camera in Amman is Candide Kirk, co-founder and chief technical officer of Jordan-based game developer Quirkat. Candide, thank you for your time. In short, what on earth happened? How did 77 million people get affected at this level? It seems extraordinary in an age of what should be security.
I mean, it's such a nightmare for everyone involved, for game developers, for the PSN users, more than anyone else. For the implications are I don't think we even realize what the implications are so far, because when you look at the information that's actually been compromised and you're looking at the names, the date of birth, the password hint, I mean, these are things that you'd probably reuse, not just on the PSN network. So even if, and we're still not sure whether the credit cards themselves have been compromised, even if the credit cards themselves have not, the implication is just, stupendously large. So, I mean, Sony have kind of been quiet about this for a week now. They came out with the admission of the compromise only last night, and so now we're looking to see whether or not the PSN comes back on, and then to gauge the user's trust in the system going forward.
We've spoken pretty much exclusively about the consumers. I wonder how this might affect someone like you. You're a game developer. Does this raise all sorts of questions for you and the business that you do?
Well, absolutely. I mean, for us, even on our level at Quirkat, we have games that are provided exclusively on the PlayStation Network store. So, I mean, we're looking at loss of sales that is accumulating with every day, and then going forward, the user's trust. And so, it was a challenge, especially in the Middle East, to get the users to give up their credit card information in the first place, and to be, open to purchasing games through digital distribution channels. Now we have more of a trust issue, and now there's precedence. So there's the users will come up to us and say, but hang on a minute, is this safe? And right now we can't say that it actually is. So that is a big challenge for us.
Just finally, Candide, a wider question about the gaming industry, the consoles. We see Nintendo's about to put out a new Wii console. Has it really been losing out to the likes of Microsoft's Xbox and the Sony PlayStation? Is there something to get it back in the game, literally?
The Wii had the weakest processor and the weakest graphics, and sort of the gimmick there was the motion control. With both Kinect and the PlayStation Move now doing the motion sensing and the motion control, Wii really has to catch up with the graphics and the processing power. And so, as always with Nintendo, the developer community is looking forward to seeing what kind of new innovation they'll bring to play. With the DS, they came out with a 3DS, and so that's kind of mind-blowing in its own way, and so now we'll look to see how the new Wii, or the Wii High Definition, is shaping up to be.
Candide Kirk, thank you so much for your time. And don't forget, Counting the Cost online. You can get to our corner of the world via the main page at aljazeera.net/English. You hit the business tab at the top and there's a link from there to the Counting the Cost page. You can watch back episodes in full at your convenience there. And feel free to get in touch if you like. At Kamal AJE is where you'll find me on Twitter. I post regular updates on the show there. Keep you right up to date with what is happening. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.